There is a river in the ancient world called the Jabbok. It is not a large river. It cuts through the hill country east of the Jordan, runs cold at night, and empties into a valley that most people in the ancient world crossed without thinking twice. But one night, something happened on its bank that changed the name of a people forever. A man stood alone in the dark. Behind him were his 2 wives, his 2 servants, his 11 sons, his daughter, his flocks, his herds, everything he had built over 20 years of labor in a foreign land. He had sent them all across first. He had arranged them carefully, the servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, Rachel and Joseph at the back, the people he loved most, placed furthest from whatever danger was coming. That was how this man had always operated. Calculated, deliberate, always thinking 3 steps ahead. In front of him, somewhere in the darkness beyond the river, was his brother. A brother he had not seen in over 20 years. A brother who had every reason to want him dead. And between him and that brother, there was nothing left. No plan, no backup, no clever arrangement that could fix what was coming. Just the river, just the dark, just a man alone with everything he had ever done. That was when someone grabbed him. The text does not explain where this person came from. It simply says that a man wrestled with Jacob until the breaking of the day. And Jacob, who had never in his life held on to anything without a reason, held on. They fought through the entire night. When morning came, the stranger touched Jacob's hip and threw it out of joint. Jacob was in pain. Jacob was exhausted, and Jacob would not let go. The stranger said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the stranger asked a question that sounded simple and was not simple at all. He said, "What is your name?" Jacob told him, and the stranger said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob. It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed." Jacob walked away from that river as the sun came up. He was limping. He would limp for the rest of his life, and he carried a new name that would outlast him by thousands of years. A name that an entire nation would one day carry as their own. To understand what happened at that river, you have to go back, all the way back, to a family that was already broken before Jacob was born, to a mother who loved too strategically and a father who loved too blindly, to a set of twins who came into the world already fighting each other for position. The man who stood at the Jabbok did not become who he was overnight. He was built, slowly and painfully, over the entire length of a life that started with his hand wrapped around his brother's heel. This is that story. Chapter 1. The Family Before Jacob. Every person inherits a world they did not make. Jacob inherited one of the most complicated households in the ancient world. A family built on miraculous promise and held together by the kind of tension that never quite breaks into open conflict, but never quite resolves either. To understand Jacob, you have to understand what he walked into before he could walk at all. Go back 1 generation. Abraham had been given a promise that his descendants would become a great nation. He had waited decades for that promise to take physical form, and when it finally did, when Sarah gave birth to Isaac at an age that made the birth itself feel like a rebuke to every natural law, the weight of that promise settled onto one child with the full force of everything his parents had waited for. Isaac grew up knowing he was the child of a miracle. That is a particular kind of pressure that most people will never experience. He was not just a son. He was the proof that God had kept his word. Every decision his father made, every altar built, every covenant renewed, pointed toward Isaac as the reason and the result. He was the continuation of something enormous. What that does to a person is hard to calculate, but one thing it can do, and one thing it appears to have done with Isaac, is create a man who was more comfortable receiving than reaching. Abraham had done the reaching. Abraham had left his homeland, argued with God, waded through decades of silence, and held the knife over his own son on a mountain. Isaac had been the knife and the altar and the miracle. All at once, on that same mountain, he had survived something no one should survive, and come down the other side quieter than he went up. He was a man shaped by being chosen, rather than by doing the choosing. When it came time for Isaac to take a wife, his father sent a servant to find one. Rebekah came to Isaac. The text says he loved her, and she became a comfort to him after his mother's death. That is a beautiful thing to say about a marriage, and it is also a slightly strange thing, because it frames Rebekah's primary function in Isaac's life as filling an absence. The love was real. The dynamic it created would turn out to be consequential. Rebekah was not a passive person. She was sharp, decisive, and willing to act when the people around her would not. When Abraham's servant arrived at the well and asked for water, she did not just give him water for himself. She volunteered to water all 10 of his camels. Anyone who has spent time near camels knows that watering 10 of them is not a small gesture. It is a physical commitment that takes real time and real effort. The servant stood watching her and said nothing. He was testing her without telling her he was testing her. And she passed a test she did not know she was taking. That quality, the ability to see what needed to be done and do it without waiting for permission, would define Rebekah's place in her household, and it would define the role she played in the story of her sons. Isaac and Rebekah waited 20 years before Rebekah became pregnant. When she finally conceived, the pregnancy itself was difficult enough that she went to ask God directly what was happening. The answer she received was not the kind of answer that makes a mother feel better. God told her there were 2 nations in her womb, 2 peoples who would be separated from one another. One would be stronger than the other, and the older would serve the younger. She carried that knowledge through the rest of her pregnancy. She carried it into the delivery room, and she carried it for the rest of her life. 2 boys came out. The first was red and covered in hair, and they named him Esau. The second came out with his hand wrapped around his brother's heel, and they named him Jacob. The name in Hebrew plays on the word for heel, and it carried a second meaning that everyone in that culture would have heard immediately. It could mean the one who grabs the heel. It could also mean the one who supplants, the schemer, the deceiver. They named him that on the day he was born. Think about what it means to grow up with a name that already contains a verdict about your character. The boys grew up differently. Esau became a skilled hunter, a man of the open fields, the kind of son that made fathers in that culture proud in the most straightforward way. He came home with something to show for his time. He was physical, immediate, present. The text says Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game. That is a specific and slightly uncomfortable detail. Isaac loved his son, and the text connects that love to what the son provided. Esau fed his father. There is nothing wrong with that on its face. But when you place it next to what comes later, it begins to look like a love that was at least partly transactional, even if neither of them would have described it that way. Jacob stayed near the tents. He was quieter, more domestic, the kind of son who watched and listened and learned how households worked from the inside. He was close to his mother. Rebekah loved Jacob. The household had split itself cleanly in 2. 1 father and 1 son on one side, 1 mother and 1 son on the other. 4 people living together, 2 alliances, and a promise from God that was already pulling in a direction that half the household did not know about. Isaac did not know what Rebekah knew. She had gone alone to inquire of God, and she had received the answer alone, and she had carried it alone. Whether she ever told Isaac is not recorded, but the way the story unfolds makes it look very much like she did not. Or if she did, he had set it aside, because Isaac was preparing to give everything to the wrong son, and Rebekah was preparing to make sure that did not happen. That is the household Jacob grew up inside. Not a household of villains, a household of people who loved their children with genuine feeling, and who let those feelings run along the grooves of preference and favoritism without ever stopping to ask what that was building in the children who were watching. Isaac saw Esau and saw the son he wanted to bless. Rebekah saw Jacob and saw the son the promise belonged to. Neither of them stopped to consider what the other son was learning from all of it. Esau was learning that his position was secure because his father loved him. He did not need to plan or scheme or protect himself. The love was simply there, constant and available. Jacob was learning something different. He was learning that position had to be earned, or taken, or maneuvered toward. He was learning that love in this household had a direction, and the direction was not toward him from his father. He was learning, without anyone ever saying it out loud, that if he was going to receive the promise his mother told him was his, he was going to have to find a way to get it himself. That is what the family before Jacob built. Not a schemer. Exactly. Something more specific than that. A man who had learned from the very beginning that good things did not simply come to him. Good things had to be reached for. He would spend the next several decades proving he had learned that lesson well, and then he would spend the rest of his life learning it was the wrong lesson. Chapter 2. Two Brothers. One Womb. There is a sentence in Genesis that most readers pass over too quickly. When Rebekah was struggling through her pregnancy and went to ask God what was happening, the answer she received ended with a specific reversal. The older will serve the younger. In a culture built on the near-sacred principle that the firstborn son received everything, position, inheritance, blessing, and authority, that sentence was not a minor adjustment to the expected order. It was a complete inversion of the world as everyone in that culture understood it. Rebekah knew that before either of her sons took their first breath, that knowledge shaped everything she did afterward, and it created a situation that was, in a very real sense, unfair to both of her sons before their lives had properly begun. Esau came out first, by every rule his world recognized, that made him the heir. He would have grown up understanding that the inheritance was his, that the blessing would be his, that the continuation of Abraham's promise ran through him. His father believed it. His community believed it. He believed it. He had no reason not to. Jacob came out second, but his mother believed, on the basis of what she had been told, that the promise actually ran through him, which means Jacob grew up in a household where his mother was raising him for a position that his culture, his community, and his father all believed belonged to someone else. He was being prepared for something he was not officially supposed to have. Think about what that does to a child. Esau had the position but not the weight of the promise behind him. He hunted and came home and sat with his father, and did not spend much time thinking about futures, because his future was already arranged. Jacob had the preparation but not the position. He stayed near the tents and watched and knew, from somewhere deep in his understanding of this household, that the thing supposed to be his was currently being held by someone else. Those are two very different ways to grow up, even in the same house, even with the same parents. The text gives us one specific scene between the brothers that tells us almost everything we need to know about how they had each turned out. Esau came in from the field exhausted. The Hebrew word implies a level of depletion that goes beyond ordinary fatigue. He was completely spent, and Jacob was there, at the tent, cooking something red, a stew, lentils, most likely. The smell was good, and Esau was hungry in the way that a man is hungry when his body has nothing left in it. Esau said, "Let me eat some of that red stuff." "I'm exhausted," Jacob said. "Sell me your birthright first." That exchange has been read 1,000 ways. Jacob the schemer, taking advantage of a vulnerable moment. Esau the fool, trading eternal things for immediate comfort. Both readings have something in them, but the fuller picture is more complicated than either version. What Jacob wanted from the birthright was not primarily material. The birthright carried practical benefits, a double portion of the inheritance, a position of authority over the family after the father's death. But in this particular family, with this particular promise running through the bloodline, the birthright also carried something larger. It carried the formal acknowledgement that you were the continuation. Jacob wanted to be the continuation, not because he was greedy, exactly, but because he had grown up knowing that was supposed to be his, and he had never found a way to live comfortably with the gap between what his mother told him was true and what his culture said was true. The birthright was a way to close that gap officially. Esau, for his part, responded in a way that tells us something important about who he was. He said, "I am about to die anyway. What good is the birthright to me?" He was hungry, not literally dying. His statement was the statement of a man who lived entirely in the present tense. The birthright was a future thing. The hunger was a now thing. He could not find a way to make the future thing feel as real as the now thing. He sold it. He ate. He got up and left. And the text adds a line that functions almost like a verdict. Esau despised his birthright. The word the text chooses implies that this was not just a bad decision made under pressure. It reflected something already true about how Esau related to the things that were supposed to matter most. Two brothers. One could not wait long enough to receive what was being prepared for him. The other could not stop reaching for what he had decided should already be his. The birthright exchange would turn out to be almost irrelevant compared to what came next, because the real collision between these two brothers would not happen over a bowl of stew. It would happen in a dark room, with an old man who could not see, and a piece of clothing made from the skin of a goat. But before we get there, it is worth sitting with the picture Genesis gives us of these two young men, because neither of them is simply a hero or a villain. They are two people shaped by the same household in ways they never fully understood, each moving toward a collision that had been arranged before they were born. Esau moved through life like a man who had never been told he might lose what he had. Jacob moved through life like a man who had never been allowed to simply trust that what was his would come to him. That difference would eventually destroy their relationship, scatter them across different countries, and set in motion a chain of events that would take decades to resolve. But it started here, in a tent, over a bowl of lentil stew that the text goes out of its way to describe as red, because Esau's nickname, the name that stuck to him, was Edom, which means red, and the color of the stew he sold his future for was the color that would follow his name forever. Genesis notices these things. Chapter 3. The Stolen Blessing. Isaac was old and his eyes were dim. That is how Genesis sets the scene. Not with drama or foreboding, just a simple physical fact about an old man at the end of his life who could no longer see clearly. But in the economy of this story, that one detail, an old man's failing eyesight, is what makes everything that follows possible. And it raises a question that the text never quite lets go of: how much of what happened next was human scheming, and how much of it was something older and larger, moving through the scheming without anyone's full understanding. Isaac called Esau to him. He said, "I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Take your weapons. Go out to the field. Hunt game for me, and prepare the kind of savory food I love. Then bring it to me so that I may eat, and my soul will bless you before I die." This was meant to be a private conversation. A father and his eldest son, alone. Isaac did not announce what he was planning. He did not gather the family. He did not tell Rebekah. He called the son he loved, the son who fed him the things he enjoyed, and he made arrangements to pass everything to that son before he died. The whole transaction was meant to happen quietly, before anyone else knew what was going on. Rebekah was listening. The text states that plainly, without commentary. She heard what Isaac said to Esau, and the moment Esau left for the field, she moved. She went to Jacob and told him exactly what she had heard. Then she gave him instructions. Go get 2 good young goats. Bring them to me. I will prepare the savory food your father loves. You will bring it to him. He will bless you instead. Jacob's response is one of the most honest moments in his early story. Because he did not refuse on moral grounds. He did not say, I cannot deceive my father. That would be wrong. What he said was practical. He said, Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. If my father touches me, he will know I am not Esau, and I will bring a curse on myself instead of a blessing. His concern was not whether the deception was right. His concern was whether it would work. That tells us a great deal about where Jacob was at this point in his life. He had grown up with his mother telling him the promise was his. He had secured the birthright from Esau through a transaction that was technically legitimate but morally hollow. Now his mother was offering him the blessing through outright deception. And his only question was whether the deception would hold up under scrutiny. Rebekah told him not to worry about the curse. She would take it on herself. Just do what she said. She prepared the food. She took Esau's best garments and put them on Jacob. She covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the skins of the young goats. And she sent him in to his father. What followed is one of the most uncomfortable scenes in the entire book of Genesis. And the discomfort comes not from its cruelty but from its intimacy. This was a son deceiving his dying father. His father, in the private space where a man was preparing to do the most personal thing a patriarch could do. Pass on the weight of a divine promise to the child who would carry it forward. Jacob went in and said, My father. Isaac said, Here I am. Who are you? My son. Jacob said, I am Esau, your firstborn. Plain as anything. A direct lie told to a blind old man who had no way to verify it. Jacob then told Isaac that he had done what Isaac asked, and invited him to eat and bless him. Isaac was suspicious immediately. He said, How did you find game so quickly? Jacob said, Because God brought it to me. He used the name of God to support a lie he was telling to his father. That detail should not pass without notice. Jacob was comfortable using sacred language as a tool for getting what he wanted. Even in a moment as loaded as this one, Isaac said, Come near so I can touch you, my son, and know whether you really are Esau. Jacob went near. Isaac felt him. The goat skin on his hands felt like Esau's hair. And Isaac said something that the narrative had been holding in tension for the entire scene. He said, The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He knew. On some level he could not fully articulate. Isaac knew. The voice was wrong. Something was wrong. And he asked one more time, directly, Are you really my son Esau? Jacob said, I am. Isaac ate. Isaac drank. And then Isaac blessed him. The blessing was enormous. It carried the dew of heaven, the fatness of the earth, grain and wine in abundance. It declared that nations would bow down to Jacob, that his mother's sons would bow down to him, that those who cursed him would be cursed and those who blessed him would be blessed. It was the blessing carried through Abraham and Isaac, and Jacob had it now. He had barely left the room when Esau came back from the hunt. Esau prepared the savory food and brought it to his father. He said, Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, so that you may bless me. And Isaac said, Who are you? Esau said, I am your son, your firstborn. Esau. The text says Isaac trembled very greatly. Not surprise, not anger, trembling. The kind of physical response that happens when a person suddenly understands the full shape of something that has been happening around them without their knowledge. Isaac had been deceived by his own son, in his own home, in the most sacred act a father could perform. And the trembling suggests that somewhere underneath the shock, there was also recognition. The voice had been wrong. He had known. and he had blessed anyway, and now he could not take it back. Isaac said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he will be blessed. He will be blessed." Isaac did not say he had made a mistake. He did not say he would correct the situation. He said the blessing was given and the blessing would stand, whether that was resignation or something else. Whether Isaac on some level understood that this was the way the promise was supposed to move. The text does not say. But he did not try to undo what had been done. When Esau heard those words, the text says he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry. That sound is one of the things Genesis wants you to carry with you. Esau had done nothing wrong that day. He had gone out when his father asked him to, done what his father wanted, come back, and found that everything had been taken while he was gone. He asked his father for a blessing. Isaac said he had already given Jacob all the blessings available. What was left for Esau? Esau wept. He said, "Bless me too, my father." Isaac blessed him with something smaller, the fatness of the earth, the dew of heaven, but without the declaration of lordship over his brothers. And then, the text says, Esau would one day break free. Esau hated Jacob. He said in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Rebekah heard about this too. She told Jacob to run. Go to her brother Laban in Haran. Stay there until Esau's fury subsided, until he forgot what Jacob had done to him. Jacob left. He left with the blessing and without his home. He left with the promise and without his family. He left with the thing he had spent his whole young life maneuvering toward, and with a brother behind him who wanted him dead, and a father who was trembling in a room he would never see again. The blessing had cost him everything it was supposed to secure. And here is what Genesis is already beginning to build underneath that cost. What Jacob did to get the blessing was real. The deception was real. The pain it caused was real. Esau's cry was real. Isaac's trembling was real. None of that is softened or explained away by what comes after. But the blessing itself did not fail. It did not dissolve. It did not come with an asterisk attached. The promise moved forward through a man who had obtained it through fraud. And it moved forward anyway. That is not an endorsement of fraud. It is a statement about the nature of the promise. The promise did not belong to Jacob because Jacob was worthy of it. It belonged to Jacob because God had said so before Jacob was born. The method Jacob used to obtain it was wrong. The result was somehow still the result that was supposed to happen. Jacob would spend the next 20 years learning the difference between possessing a blessing and actually becoming someone capable of carrying it. He left Canaan with something real in his hands. Even if his hands had taken it in the worst possible way, Esau watched him go. Or perhaps he did not watch. Perhaps he was already somewhere else, trying to figure out how to live inside a story that had arranged itself against him before he had a chance to understand the rules. The text gives us one more detail about Esau after Jacob leaves. A small, sad detail that is easy to miss. Esau saw that his father did not approve of the Canaanite women he had married. So Esau went and took another wife. This time from the family of Ishmael. He was still trying. He was still looking for a way to please his father, to recover something of the position that had been taken from him. He was still trying, and it was still not working, and he did not fully understand why. That detail about Esau trying to please his father after losing everything is one of the quietest and most human moments in the entire story, and it makes what happens much later, when Esau runs toward Jacob with open arms, feel like the culmination of something that had been building in him across 2 decades. Not bitterness that curdled, but a grief that eventually found its way to something better. That part comes much later. For now, Jacob is on a road heading north, carrying a stolen blessing and leaving a trail of damage behind him that he will not be done reckoning with for the rest of his life. Chapter 4. The Fugitive and the Ladder. Jacob had never been alone before. That is easy to overlook but important to understand. He had grown up in his mother's orbit, close to the tents, within the structure of a household that had shaped him from birth. Even his schemes had been collaborative. The birthright negotiation was just the two brothers, but the stolen blessing had been orchestrated with Rebecca. He had never operated entirely without someone backing him up. Now he was alone on a road to a place he had never been, going to stay with an uncle he had never met, in a culture that was not his, carrying a blessing that had been given to the wrong name. The first night out, he stopped because the sun had gone down. He took one of the stones of the place, put it under his head, and lay down to sleep. No tent, no servants, no mother nearby, just a fugitive on the ground in the open air, with a rock for a pillow, and the full weight of what he had done settling around him in the dark. He dreamed. In the dream there was a ladder, or a stairway, set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. The angels of God were going up and going down on it, and above it stood God, who said to Jacob everything that had been said to Abraham and to Isaac. The land on which you are lying, I will give to you and your offspring. Your offspring will be like the dust of the earth. In you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And then something that had not been said to Abraham or Isaac in quite this way. Something specifically for a man alone on the ground with a rock under his head and nowhere safe to go. God said, I am with you. I will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Jacob woke up. What he said when he woke up is one of the most honest responses to a divine encounter in all of Genesis. He did not say, I believe. He did not say, I surrender. He said, surely God is in this place. And I did not know it. And he was afraid. That fear matters. Jacob had grown up in a household saturated with the Abraham story, with the language of covenant and promise and divine encounter. He knew the theology. He had used the name of God to lie to his father just days before. But the actual experience of the presence behind that name, the felt reality of it, was something he was not prepared for. He said, this is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. He took the stone he had slept on and set it upright as a pillar and poured oil on it. He called the place Bethel, which means the house of God, and then he made a vow. Here is where Jacob, even in the middle of what appears to be a genuine encounter with something enormous, reveals the deepest pattern of his character. His vow went like this: if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then God shall be my God. If, then, he set conditions. He was making a deal with the God who had just appeared to him in a dream and promised to never leave him. He took the unconditional promise he had just been given and responded to it with a conditional contract. If you do these things, then you will be my God. That sentence contains Jacob's entire problem in 12 words. He had been told, without conditions, that he was the one the promise moved through. He had been shown, in a dream so vivid that he woke up shaking, that the presence of God was real and near, and not bound by his circumstances, and his response was to try to negotiate the terms. He could not receive a gift without turning it into a transaction. He could not be given something without his hands immediately reaching up to grip it, to hold it on his own terms, to establish the conditions under which he would accept it. He had learned, from his family, from every experience he had so far, that things do not simply come to you. You reach, you negotiate, you secure. The latter dream is Genesis showing us what Jacob was missing, and showing us that what he was missing was being offered to him freely, and showing us that even when it was offered freely, he could only receive it on contractual terms. He got up and continued to Haran. The road to Haran was not short. He was moving away from the land of promise and into the territory of his mother's people, following the same path that Abraham's servant had followed generations earlier, but in the opposite direction, away from home rather than toward it. When he arrived in the region of Haran, he came to a well. There were flocks of sheep lying around it, and the shepherds were waiting for other shepherds to arrive before they could move the large stone covering the well. Jacob asked if they knew his uncle Laban. They said yes, and they said, "Here comes his daughter Rachel now with his sheep." Jacob looked up. What happened in Jacob when he saw Rachel is one of those moments where Genesis compresses enormous emotional reality into almost no words at all. The text simply says that when Jacob saw Rachel, he went to the well, rolled the stone off it by himself, and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. He rolled a stone that normally required multiple shepherds to move. Alone, he had arrived in a foreign land with nothing but a promise and a stolen blessing. Exhausted from travel, carrying the weight of what he had left behind, and he saw a woman at a well and moved a stone that took multiple men to move. That is the language of a man undone by feeling, not calculation, not strategy. Jacob had spent his whole young life calculating. He had never simply felt something and let the feeling move him without a plan attached. The birthright had been a negotiation. The blessing had been a scheme. Even the Bethel vow had been a transaction. But Rachel at the well produced something in Jacob that his usual operating mode had no category for. He wept, out loud, in front of people he had just met. He told Rachel who he was, that he was her father's relative, Rebekah's son. She ran to tell her father. Laban came out, embraced Jacob, brought him home. He told Laban everything that had happened. And Laban said, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." That sentence was welcoming. It was also, in ways that Jacob could not have known yet, the opening line of a very long game. Because Laban had seen Jacob roll that stone, he had heard what Jacob said to Rachel. He had watched a man who was clearly capable and clearly emotional arrive at his door with nothing material to offer but an enormous amount of labor available in him. Laban was a man who noticed things like that. Jacob had just walked out of one household that had shaped him through favoritism and strategic love. He was about to walk into another one, run by a man who was, in certain key respects, a more polished and more patient version of everything Jacob himself had learned to be. He did not know that yet. He was still standing in Laban's house, having just arrived, probably still thinking about the woman at the well. The stone had been heavy and he had moved it without thinking. That is the last completely uncalculated thing Jacob would do for a very long time. Chapter 5. Rachel and the Price of Love. Laban asked Jacob a question after Jacob had been staying with him for a month. He said, "Just because you are my relative, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be?" It was a reasonable question on its surface. A man should be paid for his work, but the way Laban framed it is worth noticing. He did not say, "I want to compensate you fairly." He said, "Tell me what your wages should be." He was putting the number in Jacob's mouth. He was inviting Jacob to make the first offer in a negotiation, which is almost always the less advantageous position. Laban already knew what Jacob wanted. He had 2 daughters. The older was named Leah, and the text describes her eyes in a way that scholars have argued about for centuries. The Hebrew word used could mean weak, or soft, or tender, and no one has fully agreed on whether it was meant as a flaw or a compliment. What the text is clearly doing is setting up a contrast, because the very next sentence says Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. The contrast is deliberate. The text wants you to know how these 2 women were seen in their household before Jacob ever opened his mouth. Jacob said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Not Leah. Rachel, the younger, not the older. In that culture, Asking for the younger daughter before the older was itself a departure from expected order. Laban noted it, accepted it, and said, "It is better that I give her to you than any other man. Stay with me." Jacob served 7 years. The text stops here and gives us one of the most quietly beautiful lines in all of Genesis. It says the 7 years seemed to Jacob like only a few days because of the love he had for her. Sit with that for a moment. 7 years of labor, working for another man, in a foreign land, separated from everything he had known, and the time passed like days because of who was at the end of it. That is not the psychology of a man always running a calculation. That is a man in love in the most complete and disorienting sense of the word. A love that reorganized his entire experience of time. Jacob had been capable of this all along. That is what the 7 years reveals. Underneath all the maneuvering and the conditional vows, there was a person who could love something so completely that 7 years felt like a few days. He had just never before encountered something he loved that he could not scheme his way toward. Rachel was the first thing in his life that required him to simply wait. And he waited. He did it. When 7 years were completed, Jacob went to Laban and said, "Give me my wife, for my time is completed, that I may go into her." Laban made a feast. He gathered all the people of the place together, and that evening he brought his daughter to Jacob. The text does not describe the wedding. It does not give us the moment of arrival or celebration. It moves directly to what Laban did and what the morning revealed. In the morning, behold, it was Leah. 3 words in the original Hebrew. Behold, Leah. The shock of those 3 words is architectural. The entire 7 years has been building toward Rachel. The entire feast has been building toward the wedding night. And then the morning comes and the text just says Leah. Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not the custom here to give the younger daughter before the firstborn." That answer deserves the full weight of attention it carries. Laban was not explaining a rule Jacob had somehow missed. He was telling Jacob, with complete composure, that the order of the daughters mattered. The older had to come first. You cannot give the younger before the firstborn. Jacob knew something about giving things in the wrong order. He knew something about taking the younger's position and placing it above the older's. He had done exactly that to Esau. He had come in as the second son and displaced the first son, in the dark, while his father could not see clearly. And now he had been the one in the dark. He had been the one who could not see clearly. A man had used the expected order of daughters to do to him something structurally identical to what he had done to his brother with the expected order of sons. Genesis does not underline this. It does not stop and say, "Look at the parallel. Do you see it?" It just places the 2 scenes in the same story and lets them speak to each other across the chapters. A father deceived in the dark about which son was which. A husband deceived in the dark about which daughter was which. The method was the same. The disorientation was the same. The discovery in the morning was the same. Jacob did not have a visible moment of recognition. He was angry, and he had every right to be angry. But the story is building something underneath his anger that will only fully surface years later at a river called Jabbok. Laban offered a deal. Complete the week of celebration for Leah, and then I will give you Rachel as well, in exchange for another 7 years of service. 7 more years. After already serving 7, for the woman he loved, he would work 14 years total. Jacob agreed. He completed the week with Leah. Laban gave him Rachel. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served Laban another 7 years. The household Jacob was building in Haran was already shaped like the household he had come from. There was a preferred wife and a less preferred wife. A love distributed unevenly. A visible hierarchy of affection that everyone in the household could see and feel and would have to live inside of every single day. Jacob had grown up watching his father love Esau more. He had felt that inequality from the inside. From the position of the one who was not the preferred son, he knew what it did to a person, and he was now creating the same structure in his own household. Not out of cruelty, but because Leah had been placed in his life by deception, and Rachel had been placed there by love, and he did not know how to feel about both of them with equal warmth. He loved Rachel. He tolerated Leah, and Leah knew the difference every day. The text tells us that God saw that Leah was not loved, and he opened her womb. Rachel was barren. Leah's fertility was not only a gift to Leah, it was a message that Jacob was not reading. Every son Leah bore carried a name that was a window into what she was experiencing. Her firstborn she named Reuben, which sounds like the Hebrew for sea, Ason, and she said, "Because God has seen my affliction, for now my husband will love me." She thought a son would turn Jacob toward her. It did not. Her second son she named Simeon, which sounds like the word for heard, and she said, "Because God has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also." Hated is a strong word. The Hebrew word used could mean unloved or less loved, but Leah chose the stronger word. That is how it felt from inside it. Her third son she named Levi, and she said, "Now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Still trying. Her fourth son she named Judah, and she said simply, "This time I will praise God." She did not mention Jacob. She had stopped measuring her worth by whether he loved her the way she wanted to be loved. She had found something to hold on to that was not dependent on his attention. That shift in Leah is one of the quiet transformations in this story that rarely gets the credit it deserves. She went from looking to Jacob to validate her existence to finding a place to stand that Jacob could not give her and could not take away. The names of her sons chart that journey almost like a diary. Jacob did not see any of this. He was looking at Rachel. Rachel was watching Leah have children, and the watching was unbearable. She said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I shall die." She said it like he was withholding something deliberately, like if he just tried harder or cared more. The children would come. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel. He said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" That is not the response of an emotionally available husband. It is the response of a man who is being blamed for something outside his control and who does not know how to hold someone else's pain without becoming defensive about it. He loved Rachel completely, and her suffering made him angry because he could not fix it. Rachel gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Bilhah bore 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Leah, seeing that she had stopped bearing, gave Jacob her servant Zilpah. Zilpah bore 2 sons, Gad and Asher. The household had become something Jacob had not designed but had failed to prevent. 2 wives, 2 additional women, children being born and named and counted in a competition that was never really about the children. It was about love. It was about being seen. It was about 2 women trying to win the permanent attention of a man whose attention was already permanently somewhere else. God eventually opened Rachel's womb. She conceived and bore a son and called his name Joseph. She said, "God has taken away my reproach." And even in the moment of finally having what she wanted, she was already asking for more. "May God add to me another son, Joseph, the son of Rachel." The child Jacob had waited for in the most private part of himself. Jacob would love Joseph in a way that would fracture everything else he had built. But that comes later. For now, the family was in Haran. Jacob was surrounded by wives and children and the relentless management of a complicated household. He had never been more materially surrounded by people in his life, and he had never been more alone in the way that actually mattered. Chapter 6. The Long War with Laban. Jacob had been in Haran for 14 years when something in him shifted. After Joseph was born, the text says Jacob told Laban, Send me away so that I may go to my own home and country." He was ready to leave. He had the wives, the children, the life. He wanted to take them back to Canaan, back to the land of the promise, back to the place that was supposed to be his. Laban said, "I have learned by divination that God has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give them." This is the second time Laban has asked Jacob to name his wages. The tone this time was slightly different, almost plaintive, almost honest about his self-interest. He knew his prosperity was connected to Jacob's presence, and he was not going to let that walk out the door without negotiation. Jacob was not naive about this. He told Laban, "You know how I have served you and how your livestock has fared with me. You had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. God has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household?" That is a man who knew his own worth. He was not asking for charity. He was stating the terms of an arrangement that had benefited Laban enormously and asking for his fair share. What Jacob proposed was unusual. He would continue tending Laban's flock, but going forward, every speckled and spotted sheep, and every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted goat would be his wages. He was asking for the exceptions, the animals that differed from the standard coloring of the flock. Laban agreed. Then Laban did something that revealed exactly what kind of man he was. That same day, he removed all the male goats that were striped and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and all the dark-colored lambs, and gave them to his sons. He put a 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. He accepted the agreement and immediately dismantled the conditions that would make the agreement work. Jacob responded with something that looked like a backup plan he had ready. He took fresh branches from certain trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the wood. He set the peeled branches in front of the flocks at the watering troughs, where the animals came to drink and breed. The stronger animals produced striped, speckled, and spotted offspring. Jacob separated those animals and built up the strongest, healthiest flocks for himself. Later in the story, Jacob tells his wives that in a dream God showed him what was actually happening, that the whole enterprise was not only Jacob's cleverness, but something working through his labor and his circumstances that Laban's manipulations could not ultimately prevent. Jacob grew exceedingly rich. He had large flocks, female servants and male servants, camels and donkeys. Laban's sons noticed. They said, "Jacob has taken all that was our father's." And Laban's own face toward Jacob was not what it had been before. The warmth of the early years was gone. What remained was two men who both understood exactly what the other was capable of, watching each other across the compound with the wary tension of people who had been in a long, mostly silent contest and both knew it. Then God said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you." Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where his flock was. He told them everything. The way Laban had changed his wages 10 times. The way the results had kept turning in Jacob's direction anyway. The dream. The instruction to return to Canaan. Rachel and Leah gave him an answer that said everything about what life under Laban's roof had actually been like for them. They said, "Is there any portion or inheritance left for us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has indeed devoured our money. Whatever God has said to you, do it." Their father had sold them. That is the word they used. Laban had traded his daughters for Jacob's labor and had treated the transaction as a financial one. And his daughters had known it for years. Jacob arose and set his children and his wives on camels. He drove all his livestock ahead of him, and he left without telling Laban, while Laban was away shearing his sheep. Rachel, before she left, stole her father's household gods. The text does not fully explain why, whether the household gods were connected to inheritance rights, or whether this was Rachel claiming something from a father who had given her nothing. The story does not say, It just tells us she took them, hid them in her camel's saddle, and sat on them. And later, when Laban came searching for them in a rage, she told her father she could not rise to greet him because she was in her period. Rachel, the beloved wife, the woman Jacob had worked 14 years for, was capable of quick thinking under pressure and comfortable with deception when she needed it. She was, in that moment, very much Jacob's wife. Laban pursued Jacob for 7 days before catching up to him. God had warned Laban in a dream not to say anything good or bad to Jacob, which Laban apparently understood as a serious boundary. He caught up to Jacob and they had a heated confrontation. Laban accused Jacob of sneaking away, of carrying off his daughters like captives, of not letting him kiss his grandchildren goodbye. Jacob, who had been holding a great deal in for a very long time, finally said what he had not been able to say across 20 years of service. He said, "These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. That speech is not the speech of a schemer. It is the speech of a man who has worked himself almost to the breaking point for 2 decades, who has been manipulated and deceived and had the terms changed on him again and again, and who has finally been given a moment to say plainly what the experience actually was. He had been cheated. He had been exhausted. He had not complained. He had kept going. Laban proposed a covenant. They set up a pillar of stones. They called the place Mizpah. And Laban said, "God watch between you and me when we are out of sight of each other." It has become a kind of benediction in some traditions, that Mizpah blessing, but in context it was a mutual surveillance agreement. 2 men who did not trust each other agreeing that God would watch what they did to each other when no one else was watching. They ate together. They slept. In the morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them, and he returned home. Jacob went on his way. 20 years. 2 wives. 2 servants who had also become wives. 11 sons and 1 daughter. Flocks and herds and servants and camels and donkeys. And ahead of him, in the direction he was walking, a brother he had not seen in 20 years. A brother who had once sworn to kill him. A brother whose current feelings on that matter Jacob had absolutely no way of knowing. He had escaped Laban. He was heading straight toward Esau. Whatever safety he had been imagining at the end of this journey was not waiting for him in Canaan. What was waiting for him was the reckoning he had been outrunning since the day he left his father's house with a borrowed blessing and the sound of a man he loved weeping behind him. He had been good at running. He had kept himself moving and building and surviving for 20 years. The road was about to run out of room. Chapter 7. The Long Road Home. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to Esau. He told them exactly what to say. "Tell my lord Esau that his servant Jacob has been staying with Laban and has been delayed until now. Tell him I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants. Tell him I am sending to inform my lord, so that I may find favor in your sight." Notice the language Jacob used. My lord Esau. His servant Jacob. He was not approaching as an equal. He was not approaching with the confidence of a man who had just spent 20 years building something substantial. He was approaching like a man who understood exactly what he had done, and who knew that the person on the other side of this reunion had every reason to still be angry about it. The messengers came back. They said, "We went to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you. And there are 400 men with him." 400 men. Genesis does not tell us what Esau intended by bringing 400 men to meet his brother. It does not say whether it was a show of force or simply the size of the company Esau now commanded after 2 decades of building his own life in the land of Seir. But it tells us what Jacob did with that information. The text says Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and herds and camels, into 2 camps. His thinking was transparent. If Esau came and attacked one camp, the other camp might escape. Jacob was still Jacob, even in fear, even in distress, even in a moment where the emotional reality of what was coming should have been overwhelming everything else. He was dividing and calculating and arranging contingencies. The man who had split his family into strategic groups while fleeing Laban was now splitting his family into strategic groups while facing Esau. The method did not change based on the situation. It was the only method he knew. But then something else happened. Something that does not get enough attention in most tellings of this story. Jacob prayed. He said, "God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, God who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good.' I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan. And now I have become 2 camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." Read that prayer carefully, because it is structurally different from the vow Jacob made at Bethel. At Bethel, Jacob had said if God did certain things for him, then God would be his God. The vow was conditional. Jacob was the one setting the terms. This prayer had no conditions. He did not say, "If you deliver me from Esau, I will serve you." He said, "I am not worthy." He said, "Please deliver me." He said, "You said you would do me good, and I am holding you to what you said." That is a different posture entirely. The man who had tried to negotiate a contract with God at Bethel was now simply asking. He was placing himself below rather than trying to position himself as an equal party to a deal. He was not claiming worthiness. He was claiming need. Something in 20 years of being outmaneuvered by Laban, of watching God work in spite of him rather than because of him, had shifted something in Jacob's relationship to his own helplessness. He was not comfortable with the helplessness. He was still afraid. But he could finally name it. He could finally say out loud, "I am not worthy. I am afraid. Please help me." That is not a small thing for a man whose entire life had been organized around never admitting he needed help. After the prayer, Jacob prepared a gift for Esau. Not a small gift. He selected 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He divided them into multiple herds and sent them ahead in successive waves, with servants instructed to tell Esau that this was a present from his servant Jacob, and that Jacob was coming behind them. The logic of the waves was deliberate. Each successive group of animals arriving would function as a separate announcement. Esau would encounter the gift in stages. By the time Jacob himself arrived, Esau would have been receiving presents for hours. It was still calculation, but it was calculation in the service of repair rather than acquisition. That is a real difference. He sent everything across the ford of the Jabbok. His 2 wives, his 2 servants, his 11 children. He sent them all across. And then the text says he was left alone. That word, alone, lands differently here than anywhere else in Jacob's story. He had been surrounded by people for 20 years, wives and children and servants and Laban always somewhere nearby, watching. He had never been without the noise of that household, the demands of that life, the constant management of competing needs and changing terms. And now, On the night before the most significant confrontation of his adult life, he had sent everything he valued across the water, and he was standing on the bank by himself, with nothing to manage and no one to arrange. Just Jacob, just the dark, just the river, and then someone was there. Chapter 8. Jabbok. The wound that named him. The text says a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Just that. A man. No introduction. No explanation. No context for where this person came from or what he wanted. Jacob had been alone, and then Jacob was not alone. And whoever this was had grabbed Jacob in the dark, and they were fighting. Wrestling in the ancient world was not a sport. It was a test of domination. The goal was to throw your opponent to the ground and pin him there. It was close and exhausting and completely physical, requiring the full engagement of every muscle and every ounce of will. You could not wrestle at a distance. You had to be completely present with the thing you were fighting. Body against body. For as long as it took, Jacob had spent his entire life fighting at a strategic distance. He had outmaneuvered Esau from across a bowl of stew. He had deceived Isaac from behind a goatskin. He had outmaneuvered Laban through careful management of breeding flocks. His victories had always been victories of positioning and timing and information advantage. But that is not what happened at the Jabbok. They wrestled through the night. The stranger could not prevail against Jacob. When the text says the man could not prevail, that is a remarkable statement. Whatever was happening in that fight, Jacob was holding his own against something that, given what we learn about it later, should have been able to end the contest whenever it chose. Then the stranger touched Jacob's hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint. The Hebrew word used for touched is a gentle word. Not struck, not broke, touched. With the lightest contact, the stranger dislocated Jacob's hip. That tells us something important about the nature of this encounter. The stranger had not been unable to hurt Jacob because Jacob was stronger. The stranger had chosen, for the length of that night, to engage Jacob as an equal. The dislocation demonstrated immediately and completely that the choice to engage as an equal had been a gift rather than a necessity. Jacob's hip was ruined. He was in serious pain. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. And he did not let go. The stranger said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Even here, even with a dislocated hip in the gray light before sunrise, facing something that had just demonstrated that the entire night of equal contest had been a kind of mercy, Jacob's instinct was to hold on and ask for what he wanted. Some readers find this presumptuous, but there is another way to read it, and it is the reading that the rest of Jacob's story supports. Jacob was not letting go because he finally understood something that had been true his entire life without him fully grasping it. Every blessing he had ever pursued had required him to hold on past the point where letting go would have been easier. He had held on through 14 years of labor for Rachel. He had held on through 20 years of Laban's changing terms. He had never gotten anything worth having by releasing his grip early. But every time before this night, what he had held on to was something he was trying to take. The birthright. The blessing from Isaac. The better share of the flock. He had always been reaching and securing and acquiring. This was the first time he was holding on and simply asking, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The stranger asked him, "What is your name?" That question was not a request for information. The stranger knew his name. What the question was doing was something different. Something that required Jacob to say out loud, in this moment, who he actually was. His actual name, the name that meant the one who grabs the heel, the schemer, the supplanter. Jacob said, "Jacob." He said his own name in the dark, to something that had just shown him that every advantage he thought he had was a gift rather than an achievement. And his name was the name of a man who had spent his life reaching for things rather than receiving them. The stranger said, Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. Israel. The word combines the Hebrew verb to struggle or to contend with the word for God. He who struggles with God. He who persists with God. The stranger said, You have striven with God and with men, and you have prevailed. Jacob asked the stranger his name. The stranger said, Why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. No name was given. The blessing was given, and the name was withheld. And Jacob named the place Peniel, which means the face of God. He said, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Now, stop here. Because this scene has been read in so many directions, across so many centuries, that it is easy to lose the specific human reality of what it was describing. A man spent a night in a fight he did not choose, held on past the point of injury, received a new name and a blessing, and walked away permanently damaged. That is the complete picture. The wound is not incidental to the transformation. The wound is the proof of the transformation. Jacob, before the Jabbok, had always walked away from his encounters intact. He had outmaneuvered Esau and left without a scratch. He had deceived Isaac and left without immediate consequences. He had outplayed Laban and left with his flocks. He had always found a way to get what he wanted and absorb no lasting damage. He would never walk straight again. The name Israel was not given to a man who had finally achieved something great. It was given to a man who had held on through the night and was standing in the morning with a broken hip. The greatness the name conferred was not the greatness of conquest. It was the greatness of persistence through injury. You have striven with God and with men, and you have prevailed. The prevailing was not domination. It was endurance. It was the refusal to release. Even after the touch that should have ended everything, every blessing Jacob had ever pursued in his life had cost him something. But this was the first time the cost was written permanently into his body. There is one more detail that Genesis records after the Jabbok. A detail so small it could easily be missed, and so significant that it changes everything about how we understand this story going forward. The text says that the people of Israel still do not eat the sinew of the thigh, the tendon that was touched at Jacob's hip socket. A whole community of people, across generations, carrying in their daily practice of eating the memory of one night when their father was wounded by something holy. Every meal, a quiet memorial to the moment Jacob became Israel. The wound that should have been a defeat was kept alive as a kind of sacred mark. They did not eat the sinew because Jacob had limped away blessed. The limp was worth remembering. Jacob lifted his eyes and saw Esau coming with 400 men. He arranged his family in the order he had planned. Servants and their children first. Leah and her children next. Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went ahead of them all and bowed to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Whatever was coming, he was not hiding behind his family. He had sent the gifts. He had prayed. He had held on through the night. And now he walked in front, limping, and bowed 7 times. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. And they wept. That scene. Esau running. Esau embracing. Esau weeping. That is what 20 years of distance and one night at the Jabbok had produced. Not the confrontation Jacob had been dreading. Not the death he had feared. An older brother running toward a younger brother with 400 men standing somewhere behind him. Needed for nothing at all. Jacob said to Esau, "Truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God, since you have received me with such favor." He had just said at Peniel that he had seen the face of God and survived. Now he was saying that looking at his brother's face was the same thing. That is not a casual comparison. Jacob was saying that the grace he had received from the stranger at the Jabbok and the grace he was receiving from the brother he had wronged were somehow of the same quality. Both unearned. Both given when he had no right to expect them. Both leaving him standing. Improbably. In the light of morning, when everything the night before had suggested something else entirely. Two brothers wept together. The man who ran toward Jacob, who had every reason to come with a weapon, chose instead to come with open arms. Genesis does not explain Esau's grace. It does not give us a chapter on what Esau had been thinking for 20 years, or what he had decided in the days before this meeting. It just shows us the running and the embrace, and the tears and leaves the explanation alone. Some things do not need explaining. They only need to be seen. Chapter 9. The father who repeated the pattern. Jacob arrived safely in the land of Canaan. The text marks his arrival with a specific word. Shalem. Safely, or wholly, or in peace. He came to the city of Shechem, bought a piece of land from the sons of the local ruler, and pitched his tent. He set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel, God, the God of Israel. He used his new name for the first time in an act of worship. It was a beginning, a real one. But beginnings are not transformations. A man can arrive somewhere new and set up an altar and still be carrying everything he brought with him. The new name was real. The wound was real. The night at the Jabbok had happened and nothing could unhappen it. But the household Jacob built in Canaan was the household Jacob had always built, shaped by the same interior architecture he had carried since childhood, the same uneven distribution of love, the same visible hierarchy of preference that his own father had built before him. Isaac had loved Esau and Rebekah had loved Jacob, and the household had split along those lines until it fractured completely. Jacob loved Rachel above all others, and when Rachel died, he loved what Rachel had left him above all others, and the household split along those lines too. The pattern did not change when the address changed. Jacob was now managing a household of extraordinary complexity. He had 12 children by 4 different women. The older sons were grown men, or nearly grown, with their own personalities and their own grievances and their own ways of measuring where they stood in their father's estimation. They had grown up watching Jacob look toward Rachel with a quality of attention he never quite turned on anyone else. They had grown up knowing that the household had a preferred section and that they were not in it. Then Rachel died. She died on the road, in childbirth, bringing Benjamin into the world. Jacob had loved her for over 20 years. He had worked 14 years to marry her. She was the reason he had gone to Haran at all. The reason the whole long detour of his life had taken the shape it took, and she died on the road, within sight of Bethlehem, before they ever made it to the place they were going. Jacob buried her there. On the road, he set up a pillar over her grave. He could not carry her with him. He left a marker so the place would not be forgotten. He carried something else instead. He carried Joseph, the child Rachel had named with a prayer for more, the son who had come after years of barrenness and tears and competition, the living piece of the woman Jacob had loved most. Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. That is how Genesis explains it. The son of his old age. But there is more underneath that explanation than the explanation contains. Joseph was the son of Rachel. He was the child of the love that had cost Jacob 14 years and had ended on a road in the rain. Loving Joseph excessively was not a policy Jacob had chosen after careful thought. It was a grief response that had hardened into daily practice over years of living with absence. He made Joseph a robe, a long robe with sleeves, or a richly ornamented tunic. Scholars have debated the exact translation for centuries. But what every translation agrees on is this: it was distinctive. It was visible. It marked Joseph as different from the other sons in a way that required no explanation to anyone who could see it. His brothers saw it every day. They saw their father look at Joseph the way he never looked at them. They saw the robe. They felt the arithmetic of a household where the love was counted out unevenly and the counting was never hidden. They hated Joseph and could not speak peaceably to him. That last phrase, could not speak peaceably. is a careful and specific observation. They could not make ordinary conversation with their own brother. The accumulated weight of what the robe represented, what their father's eyes represented when he looked at Joseph, what their own position in the household felt like from the inside, had made even small talk impossible. Every interaction with Joseph was an interaction with the evidence of their own diminishment. Jacob did not see this. He could not see it, because to see it would have required him to look at his own household the way he had never been willing to look at it, to recognize the pattern he was repeating, and to name it as a pattern rather than as love. He was not a cruel father. He was not withholding from his older sons out of malice. He was doing what people do when they have been shaped by loss and have never fully reckoned with how that shaping affects the people around them. He was loving the way he had learned to love, which was love that ranked and distinguished and made its preferences visible, because he had grown up inside exactly that kind of love and had never known another kind. Isaac had loved Esau, and it had broken the household. Jacob loved Joseph above his brothers, and it was about to break the household again. 3 generations of the same fracture, moving forward through time with different names, but the same essential shape. Then came the dreams. Joseph dreamed and told his brothers. He said, "We were binding sheaves in the field, and my sheaf arose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said, "Are you actually going to reign over us?" And they hated him more because of his dreams and because of his words. Then he dreamed again, and he told his father and his brothers. He said, "The sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." His father rebuked him. He said, "What is this dream you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" Jacob rebuked Joseph publicly, in front of the brothers who already hated their younger sibling. He told Joseph that the dream was too much, that the image of everyone bowing before him was not something to announce with the casual confidence Joseph seemed to have announced it with. But then the text adds a sentence that is easy to miss and impossible to overstate. It says his father kept the saying in mind. He rebuked Joseph in front of the brothers, and then in private, he held the dream carefully, turning it over, unable to dismiss it. He had heard something in it that the rebuke had not addressed. He had a father's instinct about this particular son, a sense that the dream carried the quality of things that came from outside the ordinary range of human experience. He kept it in mind. The brothers did not have access to that private keeping. They only heard the rebuke. They only saw the father publicly correct the son for going too far, which should have been a signal that Jacob understood the problem. But the robe was still on Joseph's back the next morning. The look in Jacob's eyes when he looked at Joseph was still the same look. The rebuke had been words, and the love was still visible in everything that was not words. One day Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were pasturing the flock near Shechem. Joseph went. He wore the robe. His brothers saw him coming from a distance, and before he arrived, before he said a word, before any action of his could have justified what they were already planning, they said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. Here comes this dreamer." They did not say, "Here comes our brother." They reduced him to the thing that most enraged them: the dreams, the robe, the father's eyes. 20 years of a message they had never asked to receive. Reuben, the oldest, pushed back. He said, "Do not take his life. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." The text tells us Reuben intended to come back later and pull Joseph out, to restore him to his father. They stripped Joseph of his robe, the long robe with sleeves, and they threw him into the pit. Then they sat down to eat. Joseph was calling out to them from the pit. We know this because years later, in Egypt, one of the brothers would say, "We saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. They heard him calling. They ate their meal. Judah looked up and saw a caravan of traders heading toward Egypt. He said, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hand on him. For he is our brother, our own flesh." He used the word brother to justify the sale rather than the rescue. He was saying we should not murder him because he is family. But selling him to strangers heading to Egypt was acceptable because they would not have technically killed him. Genesis does not soften this. Judah offered the minimum possible alternative to murder and called it compassion. They pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. 20 pieces of silver was the standard market price for a young male slave in that era. They did not negotiate. The price was almost incidental. What they wanted was for him to be gone, and 20 pieces of silver made him gone. Reuben came back to the pit, and Joseph was not there. He tore his clothes. He said, "The boy is gone. And where shall I go?" He had a plan to fix this, and the plan had failed because he had not been present when it mattered. They killed a goat. They dipped Joseph's robe in the blood. They brought it to Jacob. They said, "We found this. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." They did not say Joseph was dead. They handed Jacob the robe and let him build the conclusion himself. Jacob identified it. He said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Jacob tore his garments. He put on sackcloth. He mourned for his son many days. His sons and his daughters tried to comfort him. He refused to be comforted. He said, "I shall go down to Sheol to my son." Mourning, his sons tried to comfort him. The sons who had sold their brother were now standing around their father, watching him fall apart and saying the words people say when someone is grieving. And every word of comfort was also a continuation of the lie. And the comfort could never be real because they knew what their father did not know. Jacob wept for his son. He would weep for 22 years. And in all that time, surrounded by the sons who had done this thing, eating meals with them, watching them age, he never knew that somewhere in Egypt the boy was alive. The robe had started everything. The robe that was a symbol of the love Jacob had never distributed evenly. The love he had poured into one son, because he could not find a way to love all of them without ranking them. The brothers had stripped it off Joseph's back and dipped it in blood and handed it to the man who had made it. And that man held it and wept and refused all comfort. The robe came back to Jacob. And Jacob, in his grief, still could not see what the grief was trying to show him. He was mourning the loss of what he had loved most, without being able to see that the way he had loved it was part of what had led to the loss. That is not a condemnation of Jacob. It is a description of how grief works when it has not yet become understanding. You mourn the absence of the thing. You do not yet see your own part in what surrounded it. Jacob wept. The house was quiet in the way a house is quiet, when everyone in it is carrying something that cannot be spoken out loud. 22 years. That is how long the silence lasted. Chapter 10. The speech that changed everything. There is a moment in the story of Jacob where the son who had done the worst thing becomes the son who does the most remarkable thing. It does not happen quickly. It happens after 22 years of living inside the weight of what he had done. 22 years of watching his father grieve a son who was not dead. 22 years of carrying the knowledge that the sorrow filling that household was sorrow he had helped create. That son was Judah. The famine that brought Jacob's family to Egypt was severe enough that it reached all the way to Canaan. Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, and he sent 10 of his sons down to buy food. He kept Benjamin home. Benjamin was the only surviving son of Rachel, the last living connection to the woman Jacob had loved. And Jacob was not prepared to risk him. Joseph was the one distributing grain. His brothers came and bowed before him. He recognized them immediately. They did not recognize him. He was the second most powerful man in the most powerful nation on earth, dressed as an Egyptian official, and they were Canaanite men begging for grain during a famine. The distance between who he had been when they last saw him and who he was now was too large for them to cross without help. He gave them grain. He tested them. He demanded that next time they bring their youngest brother. He kept Simeon as collateral. He hid their money back in their grain sacks, which would terrify them on the journey home because it looked like they had stolen it. When they returned to Canaan and told Jacob everything, Jacob's response was immediate and absolute. He said, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is gone and Simeon is gone. And now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." He called Joseph gone. He called Benjamin the only one left. He was standing in a room full of his own sons, and he looked at the space where Rachel's children should have been, and he described it as emptiness. The 10 older sons heard their father say that Benjamin was the only one left, that his gray hairs depended on Benjamin's safety. They heard what that sentence contained. It was the same sentence the robe had been saying for 20 years without words. The famine continued. The grain ran out. Jacob told his sons to go back and buy more food. Judah said to him plainly, "The man told us we would not see his face unless our brother was with us. If you send Benjamin with us, we will go. If you will not send him, we will not go." Jacob said, "Why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother?" Judah said, "Send the boy with me. I myself will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever." Jacob finally agreed. He sent Benjamin. In Egypt, Joseph saw Benjamin and was so overcome that he had to leave the room to weep privately before he could compose himself. He feasted them all. He seated them in the exact order of their birth, which astonished them, because how could this Egyptian official know the order of their birth? He gave Benjamin 5 times the portion he gave the others. Then he arranged the final test. He had his silver cup hidden in Benjamin's grain sack. When the brothers left the next morning, he sent his steward after them to accuse them of theft. The steward found the cup in Benjamin's sack. The brothers tore their clothes. They returned to the city. Joseph told them, "The man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. The rest of you, go in peace to your father." He was giving them the exit. Go home. Leave the boy. Save yourselves. He was giving them the exact same choice they had faced 22 years earlier at a pit in Dothan. A younger brother in trouble. Their own freedom available if they chose it. An official who had just told them the rest of them could go. He waited. Judah stepped forward. What came out of him was not an argument or a negotiation. It was the truth, told at the highest possible personal cost, with no guarantee that the telling would change anything. He told Joseph about Jacob. He told him about how Jacob had said, "You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. And one left me, and I said, surely he was torn in pieces. And I have never seen him since." He told him that if they returned without Benjamin, it would kill their father. That the old man's life was bound up in the boy's life. And then he said the thing that broke Joseph open. He said, "Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy, as a servant to my lord. And let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would come upon my father. Let your servant remain instead of the boy." 22 years earlier, Judah had stood at a pit and said, "Let us sell him to the Ishmaelites." He had used the language of brotherhood to justify the minimum possible alternative to murder. He had sent a younger brother into slavery and called it mercy. Now he was standing in Egypt using no calculations at all. He was offering himself, his own freedom, his own life in Egypt as a slave in exchange for the freedom of a boy he could have walked away from, with the blessing of the official who had just given them the exit. He could not bear to see the evil that would come upon his father. That sentence is where the 22 years had arrived. He was thinking about Jacob, about an old man in Canaan who had already lost one son and whose capacity to survive losing another was, in Judah's honest assessment, non-existent. Judah had watched his father grieve for more than 2 decades. He had lived inside the household that grief had built. He had carried the knowledge that the grief was his fault and had never found a way to put that knowledge down. And he had decided that whatever happened to himself was less important than what this moment would do to that old man. That is not the reasoning of the man who sold Joseph. Something had changed in Judah. Not overnight. Not through a single dramatic moment. Over 22 years of living inside the weight of what he had done. Of watching his father mourn a son who was not dead. Of carrying guilt without ever finding a way to put it down entirely. 22 years of that will do something to a person. If the person has enough conscience to feel it, and enough character to let it work on them rather than burying it. Judah had let it work on him. Joseph could not control himself. He told everyone to leave the room. The Egyptians went out. The servants went out. And Joseph was left alone with his brothers, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians outside heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. He said, "I am Joseph." His brothers could not answer him. The text says they were dismayed at his presence. The man they had sold was alive. The man their father had mourned for 22 years was standing in front of them as the second most powerful person in the world. The voice that had called from the pit was the voice that had just cleared the room. They could not speak. Joseph said, "Come near to me." And they came near. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life." He named what they had done and did not soften it. "Whom you sold." Those words were plain. And then in the same breath he said, "Do not be distressed." He was holding both things at once. The truth of what they had done and the larger frame he had found to hold that truth inside without being consumed by it. He was not collapsing one into the other. Both sentences were true. The selling was real. The purpose he had come to understand was also real. What Judah had done by stepping forward had made this moment possible. Judah had demonstrated, in the only language that mattered, that he was not the same man he had been. Joseph had been watching his brothers since the moment they first arrived in Egypt. Watching them carefully in the way that someone watches people who shaped the worst years of their life. He had seen Judah step forward. He had heard every word of that speech. And he could not hold himself together anymore. He wept. He held Benjamin. He kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Then he sent word to Jacob. The messengers found an old man in Canaan who had been mourning a dead son for 22 years. They told him, "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." The text says Jacob's heart became numb, because he did not believe them. He did not believe it. 22 years of grief had settled into the permanent shape of his understanding. Joseph was gone. That was the fixed point around which everything else in Jacob's life had arranged itself. The idea that the fixed point was not fixed. That the son he had mourned was alive and waiting for him in Egypt was too large to absorb all at once. But the messengers kept talking. They told him everything Joseph had said. They showed him the wagons Joseph had sent. And the text says the spirit of Jacob their father revived. He said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." That sentence is the sentence of a man who has just been given back something he had completely given up on. No question. No demands for explanation. Just, "I am going, and I am going now. Before I run out of time." Jacob packed everything. All of Israel went down to Egypt. 66 people in total making the journey. And Joseph harnessed his chariot and went up to meet his father in Goshen. When Jacob saw Joseph, he fell on his neck and wept for a long time. Then he said, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." It sounds like despair, but it is not despair. It is the statement of a man who has received something he had written off as permanently lost. And the receiving is so complete that everything else feels like it can rest. The wound that had been open for 22 years had just been closed. And the closing was so overwhelming that the ordinary continuation of life seemed almost beside the point. Joseph was alive. That was enough. That was more than enough. Jacob had arrived in Egypt with his entire household. The household of a man who had spent his life reaching and had been shaped by loss, and had made every mistake his own father had made, and had been wounded at a river, and had wept for 22 years. He had arrived at the end of a story that had taken the entire length of his life to reach. He was not done yet. But for the first time in a very long time, the man who would die in Egypt and ask for his bones to be brought home was not carrying grief. He was carrying something else entirely. Chapter 11: Egypt and the Old Man Before Pharaoh. Jacob stood before Pharaoh. Think about what that sentence contains. The ruler of the most powerful civilization in the ancient world, surrounded by the architecture of a culture that had been building toward permanence for centuries. Sitting across from a nomadic shepherd from Canaan who had arrived in Egypt because his son had saved the country from famine. Two men in the same room representing two completely different ways of understanding what a life was supposed to be. Pharaoh asked Jacob a question that was probably meant as polite formality. He said, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" Jacob answered him, and what Jacob said in response to that question is one of the most quietly devastating sentences in the entire book of Genesis. He said, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. Few and evil." That is how Jacob described his own life. Standing before the most powerful man in the world. Having just been reunited with a son he had mourned for 22 years. Surrounded by his entire household. Alive and fed and sheltered in the best land Egypt had to offer. Jacob looked back across 130 years and said, "Few and evil." Modern readers sometimes find this jarring. This should be a triumphant moment. His family is safe. Joseph is alive and powerful and has arranged everything. The famine that was killing people across the known world was not going to touch Jacob's household. By any reasonable measure of what a patriarch's life was supposed to look like, Jacob was standing in an extraordinary position. And he said few and evil. But that is not self-pity talking. That is honesty. That is a man who had actually lived 130 years and was giving an accurate account of what those years had felt like from the inside. He had left home as a fugitive. He had worked 20 years for a man who changed his wages 10 times. He had been deceived on his wedding night. He had watched the woman he loved most die on a road before they ever reached home. He had held a blood-stained robe and believed for 22 years that his son was dead. He was not wrong about any of that. The years had been hard. The blessings had been real, and the hardness had also been real. And Jacob was not going to stand in front of Pharaoh and pretend that one canceled out the other. What he did not say to Pharaoh, and what the text lets hover in the air around that sentence, is the part that the whole story has been building toward. The years had been few and hard, and also the years had produced this moment. This room. This reunion. This survival. He could hold both things. He was not destroyed by the hardness. He was shaped by it in ways that had brought him here. But he did not say that to Pharaoh. He just told the truth about his years. Jacob blessed Pharaoh as he came in, and blessed Pharaoh again as he left. A nomadic shepherd from Canaan, with a limp and a new name, and 130 years of few and evil days behind him, blessed the most powerful ruler in the world. And the way Genesis tells it, that blessing was not a courtesy or a gesture. It was the act of a man who carried something real and knew he carried it. A man whose name meant he had struggled with God and survived, passing something of that survival on to the person in front of him. Joseph settled his family in the land of Goshen. He provided them with food. He gave them property. He managed the famine with the same quality of careful attention he had brought to every role he had ever been given, whether in Potiphar's house or a prison or the second seat of Egypt's government. Jacob's family was not simply surviving the famine. They were thriving in the middle of it. And Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. 17 years. The text gives us that number, and then gives us almost nothing about what those years contained in terms of daily life. We do not know what Jacob did with his days in Goshen. We do not know how often he saw Joseph or what they talked about. We do not know whether the brothers managed to build something like ordinary relationships in those years, or whether the weight of what they had done and what had been done to them continued to shape every gathering. What we know is that Jacob lived. He was 130 when he arrived, and he lived another 17 years. He was 147 years old when he knew he was dying. And he called Joseph to him. He said to Joseph, "If I have found favor in your sight, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt, when I lie down with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place." The burying place of his fathers was the cave of Machpelah in the field near Mamre in Canaan. Abraham had bought it. Sarah was buried there. Isaac and Rebekah were buried there. Jacob wanted to go back, not to live, because he was dying, but to rest in the ground of the place he had come from, alongside the people whose story had become his story. He was asking to be carried home. Joseph swore to do it. Jacob bowed in worship at the head of his bed. Joseph was told that his father was ill. He came to Jacob and brought his 2 sons with him. Manasseh was the older, and Ephraim was the younger. Joseph had named them years before in Egypt. In the time before his brothers arrived, and before any of this resolution had been possible, he had named Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." And he had named Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Both names held Egypt honestly. The forgetting was not denial. It was survival. The fruitfulness was real, and so was the affliction. Joseph had named his sons the way his father had named the place where he had wrestled with God, without pretending the wound was not a wound. When Jacob saw the boys, he said, "Who are these?" His eyes were dim with age, the same phrase the text had used about Isaac, whose dim eyes had made the stolen blessing possible. Now Jacob's eyes were failing in the same way. The echo was quiet and deliberate. Joseph said, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." Jacob said, "Bring them to me, please, so that I may bless them." Joseph brought them close. He placed Manasseh, the firstborn, at Jacob's right hand, and Ephraim, the younger, at Jacob's left. The right hand was the hand of primary blessing. Joseph had arranged his sons correctly according to birth order, the way it was supposed to go. Jacob crossed his hands. He placed his right hand on Ephraim, the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh, the older, on purpose. The text is very clear that this was not confusion. This was not the dim eyes failing him the way they had failed Isaac. This was a choice. Joseph saw it and was displeased. He took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. He said, "Not this way. My father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." Jacob refused. He said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. I know." Those 2 words carry the entire weight of Jacob's history. He was the younger twin who had received the blessing meant for the older. He had spent his whole life living inside the consequences of that reversal. He knew better than anyone alive what it meant to be the younger one on whom the greater blessing fell. He was not confused about the birth order. He was not making a mistake. He was making a choice, a conscious, deliberate, fully informed choice to give the greater blessing to the younger son. And this time, there was no deception involved. There was no goat skin. There was no voice that sounded wrong in the dark. There was just an old man who could see clearly with his hands, even if his eyes had failed, who knew exactly what he was doing and said so. "I know, my son, I know." That is the moment Jacob became something his own father never managed to be in the act of blessing. Isaac had been deceived. The blessing had gone to the Raya in the dark, and Isaac had trembled with the discovery. Jacob was not deceived. Jacob chose, intentionally and openly, and named the choice out loud in front of his son. The capacity to choose with intention, rather than to be maneuvered or deceived or driven by grief, was what the whole long education of Jacob's life had been building toward. It had taken 147 years. A ladder dream. 14 years of labor. 20 years of Laban. A night at the Jabbok. A blood-stained robe. 22 years of mourning a son who was not dead. But here, at the end, with his hands crossed and his eyes dim and his breath getting shorter, Jacob was doing the thing clearly and deliberately that the whole story had been circling around. He blessed them, he said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil. Bless the boys, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day." In that phrase, Jacob gathered his entire story and placed it under the care of a shepherd. A shepherd tends. A shepherd finds the ones who wander. A shepherd carries the ones who cannot walk. A shepherd stays present through the long, ordinary days when nothing dramatic is happening and the flock just needs someone nearby. Jacob had not always experienced God that way. He had experienced God as a voice at the top of a ladder, as a presence in the dark at Bethel, as a stranger who grabbed him in the night at the Jabbok. But looking back from the end of his life, the word he chose was shepherd, as though all those encounters had been the work of something that was tending him the way a shepherd tends, a flock that keeps wandering off and keeps being gathered back. All my life long. He was including all of it. The years of running and the years of Laban and the night of the wound and the 22 years of grief. He was not editing the difficult parts out of the testimony. He was saying that the shepherd had been present through all of it, working something through the whole length of a life that Jacob could only now, at the very end, begin to see the shape of. Chapter 12, the blessing he finally learned to give. Then Jacob called all his sons. He said, "Gather together so that I can tell you what shall happen to you in days to come." He was doing what Isaac had done before him, what Abraham had passed down, the act of a patriarch gathering his descendants and speaking words of weight before he left. But Jacob's version of this act was different from his father's in at least one essential way. Isaac had tried to bless in secret. He had called Esau quietly, without telling Rebekah or Jacob, and had planned to make the transfer of the promise private and immediate, accomplished before anyone else knew what was happening. The secrecy had made the deception possible. Jacob gathered all his sons together, all 12 of them, in the same room, at the same time. He did not pull Joseph aside first. He did not make private arrangements with Benjamin. He called all of them, the sons of Leah and the sons of the servants and the sons of Rachel, and he spoke to each one in turn. What he said was not uniformly flattering. This was not a father distributing identical generic blessings to 12 sons he saw as interchangeable. He spoke specifically to each one, and what he said carried the weight of having actually known them and watched them across the entire span of their lives. To Reuben, his firstborn, he said, "You are my firstborn, my might and the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power, unstable as water. You shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed and defiled it." He acknowledged Reuben's position as firstborn and his natural capacities, and then named directly what Reuben had done. He was not revising history or pretending things had been different than they were. He was telling the truth to each son, the truth about what he had seen in them and what he believed their lives would produce. To Simeon and Levi he said, "Instruments of violence are their swords." He held them responsible for the massacre at Shechem, when they had killed every man in the city to avenge what had been done to their sister Dinah. Jacob had been angry about that at the time, not from moral clarity but from fear of what the surrounding peoples might do in retaliation. Now he named it plainly as violence born from anger. To Judah he said, "Your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. The scepter shall not depart from Judah." Centuries later, when Israel had a monarchy, it would be a king from the tribe of Judah who became the standard by which all other kings were measured. The line of David ran through Judah, the man who had sold his brother for 20 pieces of silver, who had stood in Egypt and offered himself as a slave in exchange for his younger brother's freedom, who had been changed across 22 years of carrying guilt without putting it down, became the ancestor of Israel's greatest king. Jacob saw something in Judah at the end that the earlier chapters of Judah's story did not obviously suggest was there. Or perhaps Jacob had watched what Judah did in that room in Egypt more carefully than the text shows us. And what he saw in Judah, stepping forward and refusing the exit, had told him something about what Judah's line would eventually become. He spoke to each son in turn, Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher and Issachar and Zebulun and Joseph and Benjamin, each one receiving words that were specific and honest and weighted, with the authority of a man using the last of his strength to say the true things while he still could. When he came to Joseph, he said, "Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall." The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His hands were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the shepherd, the stone of Israel. He called God the shepherd again, the man who had once made a conditional vow with God at Bethel, who had tried to set the terms of the relationship before he would commit to it, was ending his life with the image of a shepherd. The distance between those two moments is the measure of how far Jacob had traveled. The blessings for all 12 sons were the act of a father who had finally learned to see all of his children, not to love them all identically, because Jacob was not pretending to feelings he did not have, but to see them, to speak truly to each one, to be present with all 12 of them in the same room at the same moment, without pulling one aside for the private treatment, without arranging the others in strategic order to protect the preferred one. All 12 sons, one room, their father's honest eyes on each of them in turn. Then he said to them, "I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave of Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan. There they buried Abraham and Sarah. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah. There I buried Leah." He named Leah. At the end of his life, in the formal instruction about where his body should rest, Jacob named Leah as the one he had buried in the cave of his fathers, the woman who had been placed in his life by deception, the woman who had loved him across a lifetime without receiving the quality of love she had given, the woman who had named her sons with the quiet diary of her grief, and who had arrived, by her 4th son, at a place where she could praise God without waiting for Jacob to turn toward her. Leah was the one lying in the cave of Machpelah. Leah was the one he named in his last formal act of speaking. That does not undo the years of unlove. It does not reach back and change what Leah had experienced. But it is a recognition, quiet and specific and placed at the very end, that Jacob had finally seen her, He finished charging his sons and drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. The text moves very quickly through that final moment. One sentence about drawing his feet up into the bed. One phrase about being gathered to his people. No prolonged scene of final words or dramatic closing moments. Just a man who had said everything he needed to say. And then stopped. Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. The Egyptians mourned Jacob for 70 days. 70 days of mourning for a Canaanite shepherd who had arrived in their country 17 years earlier as a refugee from famine. That mourning period was enormous, reserved for the most significant people, whatever Jacob had been in Canaan. Whatever complicated mixture of blessing and reaching and grief and transformation he had carried through 147 years. In Egypt, at the end of his life, he had become someone whose absence was felt at the level of an entire nation. Joseph asked Pharaoh's permission to carry his father's body to Canaan. Pharaoh gave it. A great company went up. All the servants of Pharaoh and the elders of his household and all the elders of the land of Egypt, and all of Joseph's household, and his brothers and his father's household. They carried Jacob out of Egypt. They came to the threshing floor of Atad, beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there with a very great and grievous lamentation. The Canaanites who saw them said, "This is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians." Then Jacob's sons carried him to Canaan and buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field near Mamre, which Abraham had bought as a burial place. He was home. He had crossed into Canaan as a young man with a staff and a stolen blessing and nowhere safe to go. He was carried back into Canaan by his sons and the servants of Pharaoh and the elders of Egypt. And the ground opened for him in the place his grandfather had purchased, in the company of the ancestors whose story he had continued through all the years of his few and evil days. The man who had left with a staff had come home. He had come home carrying the name Israel, and the wound from the Jabbok, and 12 sons, who were about to become the 12 tribes of a nation that would carry his new name forward into history for thousands of years. Chapter 13. What the brothers could not forget. There is something that happens after the great moments pass. The reunion at Goshen was real. The tears were real. The 17 years of provision and restoration were real. Joseph had saved his family, and the family had been gathered back together, and Jacob had died in peace, surrounded by every one of his sons, in a country that had mourned him for 70 days. And then Jacob was buried. And then the brothers looked at each other. The text says that when Jacob died, his brothers said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." They sent a message to Joseph. The message said, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you." There is no record anywhere in Genesis of Jacob giving that command. Jacob blessed his sons before he died. He told them where to bury him. He named Leah. He drew his feet up into the bed and stopped. He did not, as far as the text shows, instruct them to ask Joseph for forgiveness after his death. The brothers constructed that message themselves and chose to present it as coming from their father because they did not trust that a request coming only from them would carry enough weight. They were still afraid of Joseph. After 17 years of living in Egypt under his provision, after 17 years of eating the food he arranged and living on the land he secured and watching him be consistently kind, they were still afraid. They still believed the kindness might have been conditional, that it had been sustained by Jacob's presence and would dissolve now that Jacob was gone. That fear tells you something important. 17 years of consistent kindness had not been enough to close the gap. The wound that had opened at the pit in Dothan was older and deeper than kindness could reach in a single generation. They were still on their knees. They were still constructing protective arguments. They were still unable to come to Joseph plainly and say what was true without building a structure around it first. The brothers came and fell down before him. They said, "We are your servants." Joseph wept when he received their message. He wept because he understood what the message revealed. The fear was still there. The brothers were still living inside the story they had built 22 years before the reunion, still measuring the present by the weight of what they had done. Joseph said, "Do not fear. Am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." He spoke kindly to them and reassured them. He said it again, the same words he had said 17 years earlier at the reunion. Do not fear, because the fear had not dissolved the first time he said it, and it had not dissolved across the 17 years since. And he was saying it again, not with impatience, not with the exhaustion of a man who was tired of reassuring people who refused to believe him, with the steadiness of someone who had decided what kind of person he was going to be and was going to be that person regardless of how long it took for the people around him to fully believe it. That is the quiet thing about Joseph at the end of this story that does not get enough attention. The grand moment of the reunion. The weeping loud enough for the Egyptian household to hear. The "I am Joseph" spoken into a stunned silence. All of that had its own momentum. The emotion was real, and it carried everyone through. But do not fear. Spoken again in an ordinary room 17 years later, to brothers still on their knees. That required something different entirely. It required the daily practice of being the person you decided to be. Without dramatic feeling to sustain the temperature, just the ongoing choice, made again on an unremarkable day. Joseph lived 110 years in Egypt. He saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. He saw the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, born on his knees. He lived long enough to watch the family that had been saved by his suffering grow into something that looked like the beginning of the multitude God had promised to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. And when he knew he was dying, he said to his brothers, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." He was not speaking about himself. He was speaking about the future that was coming for the people he was leaving behind. He was telling them that what God had started in Abraham and continued through Isaac and Jacob and himself was not finished. The story was still moving. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath. He said, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones up from here." He was asking to be remembered, not honored with a monument or written into an official record. He was asking for the simplest and most human thing available to a dying man. He was asking to be carried home when the time came, to rest in the land of the promise, in the ground that had been spoken over since Abraham first arrived there and heard a voice tell him that this was the place. Joseph had spent his adult life in Egypt. He had administered its grain and managed its land and raised his children in it and grown old in it. But he was not of it. He was the son of Jacob, the grandson of Isaac, the great-grandson of Abraham. He was the man who had been thrown into a pit near Shechem and sold to traders heading south, and had ended up as the second most powerful person in the most powerful nation on earth. And at the end of all of that, what he asked for was to go home. Joseph died. They embalmed him. They put him in a coffin in Egypt. And that coffin waited. It waited through the comfortable years. While the family of Israel continued to grow and multiply in Goshen, it waited through the transition to a new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph, who looked at the Israelites and saw a foreign people numerous enough to be a threat. It waited through the decades when that new Pharaoh turned the descendants of Jacob into slaves, when the brickmaking and the forced labor and the suffering became the texture of daily life for people whose grandfather had once sat at the right hand of Egypt's throne. 400 years that coffin waited. The promise that God had made to Abraham and renewed to Isaac, and renewed again to Jacob at the top of a ladder on a night when Jacob had nothing but a stone for a pillow. That promise did not dissolve during those 400 years. It did not fade with the comfortable years or break under the weight of the slavery. It persisted the way promises persist when the person who made them has not forgotten. Then a man named Moses stood at a burning bush in the wilderness and heard a voice tell him to go back to Egypt. Moses went. The plagues came. The night came when every firstborn in Egypt died, and the people of Israel were passed over. The sea split open. The people walked out across ground that had been the floor of the sea hours before. And on the other side they looked back, and the army that had been behind them was gone. And Moses, in the middle of all of that departure, stopped and did something. The text records in a single sentence. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. One sentence, no ceremony described, no formal procession or official acknowledgement of what was being carried. Just the fact, recorded without commentary. Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear an oath, and the oath had been kept across 4 centuries because the people who received it passed it down through every generation. Through slavery and suffering and the long silence, when it must have seemed to everyone living inside it that the God of their fathers had stopped listening. They had remembered. The bones traveled through the wilderness for 40 years. They were there when the water came from the rock and when the manna appeared in the morning. They were there when the people were afraid and when they complained and when they built a golden calf because Moses had been gone too long on the mountain, and the silence had become more than they could sit with. Joseph had spent 2 years in a prison in Egypt, waiting for a door to open. His bones spent 40 years in the wilderness. Then they crossed the Jordan River into the land that had been promised. Into Canaan, the land that Joseph had left as a 17-year-old boy in a coat. The land his great-grandfather Abraham had been promised. The land that Jacob had crawled back toward, across 20 years of exile, and had finally been carried home to in a procession of Egyptian mourners. And in a place called Shechem, in a plot of ground that Jacob had purchased from the sons of Hamor for 100 pieces of silver, they buried Joseph. Shechem, the same region where Joseph's brothers had been tending their flocks when Jacob sent the boy to check on them. The same region where the journey toward the pit had begun. The same ground where Jacob had first pitched his tent after returning from Laban, where he had set up his altar and called it El Elohe Israel, God, the God of Israel, the first time he had used his new name in worship. The wound opened near Shechem. The bones rested near Shechem. The story kept its shape across 4 centuries because the shape was not arbitrary. It was the shape of a promise that had moved through one family. Through all their grasping and grieving and failing and being gathered back, and had arrived here, at this ground, with this name on it, Israel. Jacob left Canaan with a staff. He was carried back to Canaan by the servants of Pharaoh. Between those 2 journeys was the entire content of a human life. 147 years of reaching and running and loving wrong and being wounded and being gathered back and learning. Slowly and at great cost. The difference between taking a blessing and receiving one. He had 2 names, and both of them were true. He was Jacob in the ways that a person is always partly the person they were shaped to be before they had the chance to choose. The name given on the day of his birth. The one that meant the one who grabs the heel. The one who supplants. That name never fully left him. You could see it in the robe he made for Joseph. You could hear it in the vow he made at Bethel with its conditions and its if and its then. You could feel it in the way he divided his family into strategic camps on the night before facing Esau, calculating to the last possible moment. He was Israel in the ways that a person becomes the person they were always meant to be through everything they refused to put down and everything they finally learned to ask for rather than take. The name given at the river in the dark. The one that meant he who struggles with God. That name was earned in the only way names like that are ever earned. By holding on past the breaking point. By asking when every previous instinct said to take. Both names belonged to the same man. Joseph, at the end of his own life, would name his father Jacob when he spoke of him to his brothers. Not Israel. Jacob, the original name. The one from the womb. The one that carried all the weight of what the man had been before the river changed him. Because the river did not erase Jacob, it named what Jacob was becoming without canceling what Jacob had been. Both names were true. Both names are still true. That is what it means to carry a human life honestly to its end. The 12 tribes that came from Jacob's 12 sons were not a people born from purity, or from perfection, or from a founder who got everything right. They were a people born from the full, complicated reality of one family's story. A story that included a stolen blessing and a wedding night deception, and a coat dipped in blood, and 22 years of grief, and a stranger in the dark at a river, and an old man's crossed hands, and the quiet courage of a son who stepped forward in a room in Egypt when everyone else was, waiting for someone else to move. Jacob left Canaan with a staff and a stolen blessing, and his brother's name still echoing behind him. He was carried back by the servants of Pharaoh, with a new name and a wound that never healed, and 12 sons who had seen him. Finally, see them. The wound opened near Shechem. The bones rested near Shechem. That is all it has ever been.